A round movement is better than an up and down movement.
These women have gathered for a ritual. In Wimbledon, they're paying homage to a totemic object.
It's a classic piece of Tupperware that has stood the test of time, but it's had a tweak to bring it into the 21st century.
Fantastic.
It's one of the most durable designs of the 20th century.
Oh, wow. Now, this is an old piece of Tupperware. It is.
But it's not much celebrated, except by people trying to sell it to you.
Most of that product, I think you can put on a table and it will hold its own with the best crystal and the best china.
If it seems anachronistic that parties like these still take place, that's because most of us take designs like these so utterly for granted.
We have the large bowl because it's much more practical.
Not just what they do, but also what they're made from.
It doesn't look dissimilar to something we might chuck away because plastics become so disposable. And it's hard to imagine this was once a really magical object that embodied the kind of aspirations of post-war culture.
Launched in 1946, Tupperware is as much a child of its time as the baby boomers who would fill their homes with it. In the aftermath of war, designers set out to rebuild the world and transform all of our lives.
It was this idea of being in the future. Suddenly we'd all lived in the future in the post-war era, and suddenly everything was possible and we could change everything and make everything shiny and new again.
Technology represented promise, optimism, improvement.
And by the time the baby boomers came of age, design had got a lot groovier than plastic lunchboxes.
Plastic is rock and roll. You are suddenly liberated to do whatever you want.
Everybody's lying and smoking and dreaming, and so it was really the culture of the time.
Breakthroughs in technology had liberated designers. In turn, they dreamed their work would free our minds.
There was this idea that we have to completely forget about tradition. It was the idea of a total new beginning.
But with the babies of the boom years now drawing their pensions, what became of those dreams?
Now, if anybody has a problem with rice, this is great.
At the end of the Second World War, one nation's economy was clearly the winner.
The whole of the late 40s in America is about that shift from wartime production to consumer market. And designers are at the forefront of leading that new economy, that new consumer boom.
One designer made so much money from this emerging mass market, he bought his own island. And yet, the early career of Earl Silas Tupper hadn't been so promising.
If we look at some of the designs he invented, like camouflaged combs for the hunting man or underwater spectacles, there's this slightly kind of gimmicky novelty value.
Earl's luck changed when he got his hands on some polyethylene, a plastic at that time chiefly used by the Air Force to insulate radar.
People like Earl Tupper were allowed by plastic companies to experiment with potential new consumer types of goods, because although they had 40 different types of plastic, they didn't really know what it could be used for. Earl Tupper ends up experimenting with injection moulding, and this is really his breakthrough.
Tupper's designs were airtight and watertight, thanks to a lid inspired by the top of a paint can.
It replaced something people were very familiar with, which was putting a bowl over a plate, over leftovers, and putting that in the refrigerator. And so it was design in action.
No more forgotten leftovers, just good, fresh planovers.
That is what makes someone like Earl Tupper a genius designer, because his designs were based on the observations of everyday practice and life and real human need.
But Earl's invention had to be more than useful. In the era of unprecedented consumer choice, innovative marketing became a crucial part of a design's success.
At the beginning, Tupper had warehouses full of this genius object, but couldn't shift them. Nobody really got to grips with what was special about the product, what was different about Tupperware, until it was really demonstrated.
Now let's go to a little town in New Jersey where things are really popping. Yes, there's a party going on at Mrs. Betty Martin's house. It's a Tupperware party, and it's really fun.
Selling the merchandise through home parties rather than shops brought it to life.
Put on the patented Tupperware seal, then press down the center of the seal and lift a little at one side.
The parties weren't just demonstrating a product. They put it at the center of an aspirational lifestyle.
The girls get together and meet their old friends and make some new ones.
It was really about, who had been seen at which Tupperware party in whose house. And they became very coveted objects through this process.
By the end of the 50s, Tupperware had found its way into 96% of American homes. Earl had proven the commercial potential of new plastics. Now industry began to manufacture many more. Polystyrene and acrylics, laminates and perspex. Byproducts of petroleum were transformed into objects of consumer desire. Through the enthusiasm of designers who now had a whole new box of toys to play with.
Can you imagine how from this smelly, stinky oil, we have made something incredible? That's why plastic, it's one other incredible symptom of our intelligence and creativity, our science.
People talk about plastic, but in fact, it isn't a thing like wood or steel or something. Plastics are lots of things. The name itself, plastic, meaning moldable, was a miracle.
Even the names Draylon and nylon, these were all very industrial words. Everyone was excited by the possibility of the industrial. I remember my parents being so excited about the word formica. I have a formica kitchen.
In Fortune magazine in 1940, for example, there's a whole map made called Synthetica, which showed the different countries. There was the country of nylon and the new country of melamine. And there was even a really exciting island called the island of Rayon, which had a very exciting nightlife.
Of course, Synthetica wasn't the only new map being drawn in the 40s. There wasn't much of a market for Tupperware in a post-war Europe of rationing and famine. But even amidst the rubble of newly liberated Germany, engineer Max Braun declared, "We're going to make beautiful things." The firm he founded hired a young idealist who shared that mission. Dieter Rams.
the only thing what we had in our mind was to clean up the disturbed world. Don't forget, everything was disturbed in Germany. Yeah, everything. So that was also something which was for us very important, to clean up the thing in a new way.
There was a passionate desire through every walk of their life to create a new, better world, therefore a gentler world as well. It was a natural reaction to what had gone before.
What this led to at Braun was a new approach to consumer electronics. Rigorously logical designs where decoration was stripped back to a bare minimum.
When this product first hit the market in 1956, it was utterly radical. Nothing like it had been seen before. The furniture of those days was still broadly 19th century, heavy, dark wood, decorated furniture. As radios, record players came along, they came along absolutely with that aesthetic. You have a lighter colour wood in terms of beech. You have this radical use of a single sheet of folded steel. Of course, you have the clear plastic lid. Clear use of circles for twisting dials, of rectangular buttons for press buttons, with concave surfaces inviting the finger to push. The celebration of the object for its own right, rather than it being an object of which you needed to be embarrassed in your home and push into the background.
The instant clarity of Dieter's designs clearly obeys the modernist mantra that form should follow function. After years of propaganda and lies, the integrity of these designs was more than just pleasing to the eye.
Thinking about new designs in a clear, honest way can also help the democracy, which was only a small plant at this time, which has to grow. And we were absolutely sure at this time, we were sure that that could help altogether to make a new society.
I still meet people today of a certain age, they tend to be probably 70 plus, who remember the impact of this, that they were youngsters all craving this new optimistic world.
Functional high-tech became the design signature not just of Braun, but of post-war West Germany. Few designers have been as influential.
We used to worship at the altar of Dieter Rams, terrific. There was a purity and an essence and a perfection about that, which we all loved as designers.
It taught you many, many things about economy of form, apart from anything else. But it taught me personally something very important. The idea of being able to remove that which is unnecessary and get to the point of what is doesn't mean it's dry or emotionless, but what it does mean is that it should be exactly what it should be, and not an awful lot more.
And 50 years later, Dieter's disciples still seek the zen of technology.
For us, simplicity is one of our fundamental philosophies, how you can just remove and remove to create something so optimal. And I think there's just an inherent beauty when you reach that point of you couldn't possibly solve these problems with anything less.
The minimalist route to modern design was also pursued in Britain after the war, on a much larger canvas than domestic technology.
The motorways extended this idea of modernism to a much bigger, broader world. Everybody was drawn into it as they started to use the motorways. This was something terribly new to the British, and I think to some people a little bit frightening.
Construction of the first motorway began in 1956, and with it came signs of where the nation was headed. Just like Dieter Ram's work, this graphic design is a model of clarity.
You don't want them to be fussy, so it's really very minimal. We were aiming for perfection of a kind.
They were designing in the functional tradition. Fitness for purpose and simplicity are the keys to good design is the motto those designers were brought up in, and that's what they practiced.
Margaret Calvert was straight out of art school when she teamed up with Jock Kinnear to change the face of Britain's roads.
We were really seen as vulgar, brash, brave new world, I like to think. England was very conservative in terms of very formal, traditional capitals, beautifully spaced, serif typefaces. Dull, dull, dull. We literally did start from scratch.
In place of the jumble of old signs, Kinnear and Calvert created their own font, Transport, and a uniform standard where every element enhanced legibility.
Your starting point was from the point of view of the driver. What do you want to know, what do you want to see, and in what order? From a distance, you read word shape. You can't read the individual letters. You're actually taking in the shape of the name. We were invited to the opening of the M1, and we had obviously special permission by the police to go on this motorway. It wasn't open to the public at that point. It was a beautiful, sunny day, blue skies, and then just us, no one else on the motorway. Then we'd see our signs up, and we thought, wow, they just looked so good. They were big, and they sat there, and they had their own presence. We just went on and on and on and on. We missed the turn-off, or where the actual opening was, and I think we just ended at the end in a ploughed field. But we had a great day, and that's probably a big moment in my life.
Calvert and Kinnear went on to design all Britain's road signage. Their work has been described as the closest thing we have to a national corporate identity. And yet, some of the pictograms that are now part of the public landscape, in fact, have a private inspiration.
I started to think of myself at that age, and I based it on me, and I think the hair's still the same, isn't it?
Margaret's alter ego is helping a boy across the road, a reversal of traditional roles.
The sign that they had for schools, it was a grammar school boy, and I just felt, well, why not change it? Let's have no school uniforms, no reference to grammar schools because the co-educational system was coming in, and I thought it should be more inclusive.
Calvert's graphic was a sign of changing times. The comprehensive system was taking shape in the same era as the motorways. As politicians attempted social engineering, designers had more work to do. Spacious, modernist architecture aimed to liberate the minds of the next generation. And their posteriors would be supported by an invention from one of the giants of post-war British design, Robin Day.
I know that some people find that, or feel that modern furniture is rather strange and unsympathetic, but it does solve the problems of today with the methods of today.
After nearly 50 years and 14 million sales, the polyprop remains hard to beat. Young designers Edward Barber and Jay Oscarby would love to create something with the same qualities. Stackable, light, strong, washable, comfortable. They've studied Day's design closely from a very early age.
I think I had one over my head once when I was at school.
I used to sort of carve into it because you can actually scratch quite well into the side of it. And also with a magnifying glass, in the summer you can burn holes and you burn your name into the back of it.
As a consequence of its universality, the fact that you see it everywhere, it's really hard to look at. It has this kind of anonymity now because it's so present, you know, and it's so deep-rooted in our sort of landscape.
The polyprop was perfect for public buildings, not least because it was very cheap.
That is the holy grail for the designer, to produce the best possible low-cost piece of furniture.
Day's new chair cost less than a quarter of the price of its traditional wooden rivals, mostly because it was so quick to produce.
The only way to achieve a really low-cost piece of furniture is to have no assembly time and no finishing time. So the only real material that can actually achieve that is plastic.
It comes as no surprise to learn of a technique new in Britain, instant chair.
You have the mould that comes together in two parts, and then you fire the plastic in exactly here.
That's right, it goes in here, and
then once the mould comes apart, you cut this piece of where the plastic goes in. You cut it away, and it's all finished. So there's no labour actually afterwards.
It takes less than a minute to be moulded, and a further 30 seconds to fit the shell to its tubular steel legs. Yet for the designer, this cost efficiency wasn't inspired by a rush to get rich.
It's rather unusual to speak of morals in this field, isn't it? But that people anywhere in the world could get chairs that were low cost and indestructible and good for posture and so on. Yeah, I think I felt that was a moral obligation. You know, when I was very happy to work on.
It's a socialist concept that low cost, good design is great for everybody, but it's also a reaction to over-ornament and its association with a kind of bourgeois living. And it's the idea that good, simple design is fit for purpose and fit for everybody. And this chair is that.
While designers in post-war Britain modestly saw themselves as servants of society, elsewhere in Europe, they were lauded as artists. No one could accuse Italian style of being anonymous or minimal.
I'm looking for some example.
Alberto Alessi was born into a firm which embodies the Italian approach to design. The company museum is stuffed with 6 decades worth of experiments.
These were the very first prototypes of 2 projects by Achille Castiglioni, a large fruit bowl. This is a prototype made by the famous Milanese model maker Sacchi. The Aldo Rossi coffee pot. I don't mind so much about what public wants. It is always difficult to interpret what people want following a marketing research. I mean, I prefer to use intuition and sensibility. We use a different method of creation for objects, which is an artistic system, an artistic method.
This design captures the moment Alessi began producing on an industrial scale. It dates from the point when Italian style began to be exported around the world.
The start of this phenomenon of Italian design is considered to be right after the Second World War. There was a new generation of industrialists, like my father. Parallel to that, there was an extraordinary generation of new, young Italian designers.
Many manufacturers were quite happy to talk to very interesting avant-garde architects and designers. They were their friends very often, and many Italian business people had indeed trained as architects or designers or engineers themselves, quite a different tradition from in Britain, where business people were pure and simple on the whole business people.
Marshall Plan funding encouraged Italian industry to move in this artistic and peaceful new direction. Designer goods built the foundation for Italy's post-war economic miracle. So Italian designers, treated and sometimes indulged as artists, were often memorable characters. The most exuberant of them all was Joe Colombo. Joe loved jazz, cars, skiing, drinking, and smoking. He was also fond of curves and experimentation. Above all, he loved the notion of change and spent his career trying to create the environment of the future.
I remember it was fantastic to come in every year to Milan Fair and see what Joey cooked up now. Because he always had something, you probably heard about the convertible bed.
The cabriolet bed's hood could be brought down like that of a convertible car to create the kind of privacy sometimes required by a man about town. It came with built-in radio, phone, fan, and cigarette lighter. Everything but the girl.
He had all sorts of gadgets which he loved, and he was such a multitasker. And he was also a futurist. He always wanted to know what will happen next. So he always was treading a few steps ahead of the crowd. And he was a very nice guy to boot, really nice, a good company. He was, we drank well together and so forth. It was okay.
In many ways, Joe was a quintessentially 60s figure. Above all, in his favoured choice of material. Plastic had now come of age, just in time to define the pop era. Plastic so perfectly captured the 60s zeitgeist that in this Brussels museum, the decade is still alive and well.
Here is the first object that I find on the garbage from Joe Colombo. I decide that this is it. If they just throw away things of a great designer, it's the time to begin a collection. But when I start, I cannot stop. Personally, I like that one very much. I think that if the Victoria Queen was still living today, she would use that. This is one of the first pieces of the collection, the garden egg. When you want to use it, you open it, and if it's begin to rain, you just shut it. We have here the clothes of Joe DiMaggio that has been the husband of Marilyn Monroe for 1 year. More pop than that is impossible to imagine. It's the ball chair of Eero Aarnio from Finland, and if you put that in a big area, you have the impression that you bring back a certain... I don't find the word.
What unites Philippe's collection isn't a single style or even quality. It's the uniquely optimistic spirit of the time in which these objects were created.
It was totally different with what the people used to say before the Second World War, and that gives to the youth an impression that was a new world's beginning. This is a chair, and you sit here. You put your head here, everybody's lying and smoking and dreaming, and so it was really the culture of the time. And I like that too, because I'm running after my youth.
Plastic in the 1960s really promises a kind of liberation to both the designer and the consumer.
It is a very enjoyable form of design. It's rather as if furniture itself has become a party game, and that these big inflatable bits of furniture, they're like party balloons that children hold up in the air. So life's become a party.
Plastic products were perfect for teenage consumers keen to throw off the austerity of their parents' generation. Fashionable, affordable and disposable, they seduced with the promise of no-strings fun.
Many of these objects are about a very self-conscious way of constructing a new lifestyle. A lifestyle that isn't about inheriting your parents' furniture. Because how do you hand an inflatable chair to your children or your grandchildren? It's about a complete shift in generational understanding of everyday living.
The designer who most exemplified this spirit of the 60s, who took design to the edge of what was possible and then beyond, was Verner Panton. Born in Denmark, he had a very strong tradition to kick against. Early in his career, he worked for Arne Jacobsen, who designed in a well-established Scandinavian style. Humane, understated, sensible, and definitely not plastic. The region was so famous for its love of one material, Lennon and McCartney wrote a song about it.
Everything was brown and beige and dirty colors, and then Verner came with all his brilliant colors, and everybody said that he was absolutely crazy.
Back then people were used to living the same way their grandfathers and grandmothers did, and it was just not done to change anything. And he definitely wanted to do something else and show you have other possibilities too.
When his 1958 design for the cone chair was shown in New York, the police had it removed from the shop window because of the size of the crowd that had gathered to see it. But Verner had only just begun. He dreamed of something no one had yet achieved. A chair that would be molded entirely from a single unbroken piece of plastic. Unlike Robin Day's polyprop, it wouldn't be supported by separate metal legs. In fact, it wouldn't really have legs at all. For 3 long years, Verner struggled to find a manufacturer who'd take his design seriously.
We were traveling around in Europe to find a producer for it, and that was not very easy.
And then he came to Basel and showed it to my father, and my father got interested. We all felt, well, we have something quite extraordinary, but is it possible? We first did it in polyester and fiberglass, and then we worked on a foam. It went back and forth, trial and error, going through materials.
After several years of intensive technical experimentation, an astonished world finally got to perch upon the finished product.
That was the first plastic chair that was not trying to sort of mimic the chairs that had been there before. It was the first plastic chair that was really, in that sense, completely new.
The slender, cantilevered seat is just strong enough to support the human body. And look, Ma, no legs. As Eric said to Ernie, you can't see the join, because of course, there isn't one.
It was the first single material, single form chair ever to be injection molded in plastic. And that is the holy grail in design, to create single form products that can be absolutely mass produced just as if they were road cones. That's what the objective was here. It was a dream.
That dream hadn't yet fully come true. Early production depended on expensive manual labor. Later models, in a different plastic, frequently broke. Only in the 1990s did technology finally reach the point where the design could be reliably and cheaply mass-produced in polypropylene.
The Panton chair is a complete paradox because, while on the one hand it is, without any doubt, a design classic, it was really a commercial failure. It has virtually no contract application. Can you see this chair in a hospital? Can you see this chair in an office? They were never going to earn back their costs for the amount of investment that went in. It was basically a flyer they took, and it didn't make it.
But the practicalities were never the whole point. The S-chair was to furniture what the White Album was to pop music. As much as it's something to sit on, it's about the concept of a chair. It was a design as liberated as its times, something Amanda Lear made explicit for the readers of Nova magazine.
There was this idea that we have to completely forget about tradition. When people until now sat on this height, we have to sit on the floor. If people were doing this standing, we have to doing it sitting. If they were on one level, we have to create 2 levels. And it was the idea of a total new beginning.
For Verner, changing where you sat could change the way you saw the world. Free your ass, and the mind will follow. He'd now moved into what he called total design. Wall-to-wall and floor-to-ceiling. Furniture, textiles, lighting.
And
what he's getting into there, high design with a capital D and environments, and this new world of introspection, which is coming out of hallucinogenic drugs like LSD and mescaline, that exemplifies the psychedelic sort of urge to design an environment that expresses some kind of inner voyage, or a trip.
This period saw the start of a design revolution which would liberate us all in a fundamental way. But it didn't take the form Panton dreamed of. As it turned out, the road to personal freedom wasn't paved with psychedelic soft furnishings. The design philosophy that truly expanded our minds was to make stuff smaller.
Miniaturisation meant you could be mobile, and if you could be mobile, you could create your own world and your own environment. That strikes me as one of the most significant behavioural changes of the past half century.
Electronics, like plastics, promised near infinite potential for post-war designers. Japan rebuilt its economy by creating new technology it could sell to the world's consumers. Their most successful corporation realized they had to do more than invent gadgets. They designed a new lifestyle, a mobile lifestyle. Sony's commercial breakthrough came with this portable radio in 1955. The transistor had been invented in the United States. Smaller and more durable than valve technology, it's the foundation of all modern electronics.
The people who invented the transistor, Bell Labs, in 1947, said something like, there are no commercial applications for the transistor. And as far as the Americans concerned, up to about 1955 there weren't, but then Sony showed them that indeed there were. They managed to bring together all that was best of Japanese culture, which is care, discipline, attention to detail. They brought that together with brilliant American technology and a bit of American Barnum and Bayley.
Sony didn't just pioneer new miniaturized products more frequently than their rivals. They were widely regarded as the market leaders in all aspects of electronics design.
That's the first Sony pocket radio, or in fact the world's first pocket radio, 1956. This is the original Sony logo. The next radios, they went over to the newer, modern type. Japan was a very dynamic country. People wanted to produce, the best and the smallest and the most extreme of everything. They were hungry, as Germany and Italy were at the time. They wanted a new world. They had to rebuild themselves. They'd been destroyed, so they just tried harder. Here's one for the girls. The way it's presented in a sort of jewellery case.
There's a design language which they developed which was superbly able to articulate concepts of miniaturization and preciousness. Very good quality graphics, fabulously well-detailed small controls and dials. It was also dignifying because it didn't look like a piece of tat. It looked like a piece of something very, very, very precious.
This is a radio with charger and earphones. It's absolutely minute, as you can see. Ultimate aim of design is to sell things.
Successful design, I think, almost has a toy-like magic and passion feel. You sought to see a Sony product and you actually wanted to touch it. 20 years later, Steve Jobs of Apple Computer said, a design is good if you want to lick it. It excited cupidity in a way which other products didn't.
It wasn't just the way these designs looked that sold them, nor their consistent quality. Above all, it was the liberation they promised consumers.
The teenagers in the 50s and 60s suddenly had this sort of, higher wages. They could go out, they had their own lives rather than having to live with their parents as a sort of junior adult. And so, they wanted their own, it gave you freedom. You could take your music and your tastes with you rather than just have to sit at home in front of an enormous great wooden box like previous generations had to.
one design more than any other established the portable lifestyle we now take for granted.
I got my hands on the prototype and was allowed to walk around the office with the headphones on. Such a thing seemed impossible. I remember feeling like I was in a scene from a movie. It was very exciting.
I feel like an archaeologist, really. So many things to say about this. It's such an evocative product. But what's really been designed here is a new human experience. It wasn't called virtual in those days, but if you like, the great innovation of the Walkman was creating a separate reality for the user.
Our nomadic desire to carry our world with us wherever we go had inspired other designers back in the 60s. The Futuropod was a rather different interpretation of portable lifestyle. This one's touching down in Lakewood, New Jersey, where it's still standing to this day. Just about.
It's something very beautiful about it and poignant. The utopian fantasy that's what it ends up as. Here's some big funky leak right there, dripping water. Romantic ruin of the modern era.
The Futuro was designed in 1968 by Matti Suurinen and manufactured by Finnish firm Polychem. It was built largely from polyester. 2 decades after plastic started appearing in our kitchens, here was Tupperware you could live in.
They only made about 60 or 70 of them, I think. The illusion was that they were just plopped down like little spaceships. You know, the helicopter would bring them in, but of course they have to be hooked up to a cesspool and to plumbing. So that sort of destroyed the illusion.
Inside was a future from the mold of Joe Colombo or Verner Panton.
The interior plastic furnishings are the last word in convenience and comfort, with each of the built-in easy chairs pulling out to double as a bed.
Like its era, the Futuro dreamed of endless leisure. Quite probably the horizontal variety.
It was featured in a big way in Playboy magazine, you know, as the ultimate escape house. This idea of being able to put a pod somewhere, luring your prey in with martinis and a little fire in the middle. You know, all the images of this, they always have these sexy Scandinavian women dressed in Mary Mecco outfits. They came out of a very male, kind of chauvinist logic of that period. It was plastic and it was sexist. It's kind of like a great plastic sex toy. And aging sex toys have a certain appeal, I guess, to some people.
The Futuro house fell to earth rapidly. Dreams of space-age living were swiftly grounded. Just as the pod was launched, people were beginning to question whether the future was quite as bright as had long been promised.
This is a critical moment in human awareness about the environment. People realize how toxic plastic is. It goes from what's sleek and sexy to everything that's bad and negative in Western society.
The sort of feeling that we can just do anything we want, we can produce as many things as we want, we can consume as much as we want, starts to disappear. We've got to start looking after the planet and stop chucking out plastic containers and plastic bottles.
Neither biodegradable nor easy to recycle, the material of the future turn out to be hard to get rid of. It both lasts too long, yet ages badly.
The mahogany table, it builds up a patina, this kind of materiality of use that gives it value, that makes it more beautiful the more it's used. Whereas plastic actually looks the most beautiful when it's new.
Vitra, the firm which turned Verner Panton's visions into reality, now expects its furniture restorer to double as plastic surgeon.
In the 60s or in the post-war time, they haven't had the knowledge about how plastics will behave in the future. They started just to mix up components to see what happens. What you see here is they chose polyester as a plastic material, but it's very brittle. So because of the brittleness, you have all these cracks. When they start to develop plastics, they thought that they solved a lot of problems for eternity. So then really after a very short time, they found out that that is not so.
Just when the future finally arrived, people realized it wasn't all that it was cracked up to be.
Plastic started to go bad at the end of the 60s in the popular imagination, and people started talking about, a plastic world. We don't want to live in a plastic world. We don't want to be plastic people. I mean, those words, those phrases became commonplace. Plastic had been a sort of great saviour and had become the symbol in many ways of a modern post-war world. Now was going to be consigned to the rubbish dump.
Sociologists were very worried that contemporary life, contemporary relationships were becoming more and more fleeting, and that plastic as a material was somehow a metaphor for this transient mobile lifestyle we were all encountering, where nobody really cared too much about the quality of their relationships.
In the decades after the war, much of the world had felt unprecedented faith in the future. Design had embodied this promise of progress and had aimed to liberate us all. But by the early 70s, optimism about the future had ebbed away. Along with it went any excitement about the materials and designs of the post-war period. Nearly 40 years later, a French factory is about to make another chair. Plastic balls in one end, finished furniture out the other. No assembly required.
They spit out a chair every 40, 60 seconds. It's like whoop, 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 and they pile up, and there you go.
This is the perfection of the injection molding process pioneered by Robin Day and Verner Panton. The monoblock chair is formed from a single, seamless piece of plastic. Each costs barely £2 to make. Versions are manufactured by dozens of different companies all over the world. There's no patent on the design or the process. And they're found absolutely everywhere.
Some say there is as many chairs as there is people on this planet.
It's become the Zelig of the designed world. Wherever you look, there it is. From Buckingham Palace to Baghdad. It's the fulfillment of post-war design dreams. Functional, versatile, mass-produced, and cheap. All that's missing is the amazement it would have inspired in earlier generations.
on the one hand, it is so hugely successful. On the other hand, no one really likes it. People literally hate it.
When you look at something like this now, it becomes synonymous with landfill. You know, you see them all at your local refuse tip piled sky high. They're not broken, they don't really break, but people just tire of them.
The thing is about this chair, and the reason why it's been so successful in its million different guises, is that it actually does perform pretty well. You know, it's an armchair, it's probably quite comfortable, it's incredibly cheap to produce, it stacks, and so it's actually not as dumb as it looks. I mean, it's not an attractive looking piece, but it's an incredibly functional thing.
All around us is the stuff that post-war dreams were made of. And much of it is still made from the material which, just like bronze and iron before it, defined an age.
Think about our generation, our contemporary world in archaeological terms. What will be left? It will be plastic. We live in a totally plastic world, a world transformed by plastic. It's just that we can't see it anymore. It's not so visible. It's woven into everyday objects, everyday structures, from architecture to textiles. Plastic is no longer an object of optimism.
Plastic is ubiquity made visible, according to Bart, the philosopher rather than the Simpson. He calls it the first magical substance that consents to be banal. But for a particular type of person, plastic remains miraculous.
Life without plastic for an industrial designer is almost unimaginable. We almost think in terms of plastic, because with plastic, we can do almost anything, and the frontiers of what's possible with plastic are moving outwards all the time, affording new possibilities.
I don't use wood, stone and leather because I have not a lot of respect for these materials, because I love plastic. Our civilization is based on intelligence, and plastic is pure human intelligence.